Hopefully this will work better. Hello, buongiorno a tutti. My name is Barbara Serra. I work for Jazeera English. Welcome to this International Journalism Festival talk for 2016. We really have a very special guest here in the hall with us, Iyad El-Baghdadi. I'm sure you all know him. I guess there's a lot of ways you could describe him. Arab Spring activist would be one, entrepreneur as his day job, sometimes author, but I guess what I and probably maybe most of you know him for is his real presence on Twitter. And what I think I really love about Iyad's account is that it's a bridge. He tweets quite a bit in Arabic, but increasingly in English. And I found that with everything that's been happening with the Arab Spring, with the rise of ISIS, with the attacks that we're seeing here in Europe, there is a real desperate need for people that bridge the two narratives, which are often very different. The narrative that we have in the West of events and the narrative that there is in the Middle East and the rest of the Muslim world. Now, Iyad will be giving a talk that is partly based on a new book that will be coming out, and it will be coming out in Italian as well, published by La Terza. It's going to be called Vicious Triangle, Tyrants, Terrorists, and the West. So the vicious triangle for which the Middle East, unfortunately, continues to be unstable. We will have plenty of time for a Q&A afterwards, in both Italian or English. But for the moment, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Iyad El-Baghdadi.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. It's a very beautiful room, so beautiful that, you might be a little distracted, a little bit, taken aback. So I've been asked to talk for 16 minutes, given that it's 2016, but I don't think we're going to be able to wrap up in 16 minutes, but we have 45 minutes. I'm going to try to get through my presentation quickly so that we have more time to talk. I've been involved in many discussions here, met a lot of friends who I've known for years, only got to meet physically here in Perugia. And a lot of the discussions have been very alarming and very depressing, I should say. We're in the middle of this crisis when talking about refugees, when talking about the Middle East, when talking about the failure of the Arab Spring, when talking about the integration and radicalization issues. Perhaps what's most alarming, though, it's not the human cost, even though the human cost is enormous. It's not the size of the crisis, even though it is enormous. It's really how much worse it can get. What we're seeing here is the breakage of one main Arab country, Syria, and probably the earlier breakage of Iraq. A little bit of, instability in Libya, even though we cannot say it's basically a failed state, but it's not nearly as bad as what we see in Syria. But what really scares me is if we want to think, what if it doesn't stop there? What if we have failure elsewhere? And so this is kind of the frustration that someone like me goes through. I was expelled from the Arab world myself in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And sometimes it's useful to step back and try to understand the trap that we're in. And this is why the title of the talk is The Terrible Triangle, which we recently updated to the Vicious Triangle. Can we go to the presentation? Okay, so true to my online persona, I'm going to run this presentation inside Chrome. And I'm going to refer to a lot of my tweets as well, which is actually one of the advantages of having a Twitter archive going back 5 years, that you have a lot of material already online. But this is what the vicious triangle really looks like. And this is kind of the trap that we're stuck inside. We have tyrants, terrorists, and foreign intervention. And we're kind of trapped in the middle. And we call it a vicious triangle because these three angles tend to reinforce each other. And this is something that actually, it's actually very useful to understand, but it goes without saying when it comes to the Arab world. So I'm actually going to, keeping this image in our head, I'm just going to go to a little storyfy that one of my Egyptian friends made using some of my tweets here. And look what he called it. He called it stating the obvious about the Middle East. For us, this is the obvious thing, and this is what happens here. Terrorists justify their terrorism by saying that they're fighting tyranny or foreign intervention. Going back to the diagram, so the terrorists say that we're fighting because we want to fight tyranny or we want to fight foreign intervention. And then you have foreign aggressors or foreign intervention justifying the aggression by saying that they're fighting terrorism or they're fighting tyranny. And that's where you see the other two, diagrams, the other two angles. And then you have tyrants justifying their tyranny by saying that either they're fighting terrorism or that they're fighting foreign intervention, or fighting colonialism, fighting imperialism, whatever they like to call it. And this is how the loop closes, and this is what we've been stuck in. It goes on a little bit from here, and this is where we can discuss this a little bit more. But if you want to stand against terrorism, then you also need to stand against tyranny and foreign intervention. Because if you attack only one side of the triangle, you're inadvertently reinforcing the other two. If you want to stand against foreign intervention, you need to also stand against tyranny and terrorism. And if you want to stand against tyranny, you also need to stand against terrorism and foreign intervention. The whole triangle has to go. It's not just one apex. So we go back here, and this is basically what I did over here is basically describe the trap that we find ourselves in, and that we find ourselves stuck in. Now, when did this triangle really, arise? And I believe that this triangle actually only arose in the late 90s. I think we can talk about the historical roots of this, but I think it really arose mostly in the late 1990s, and it kind of got cemented after 9/11. And after 9/11, it became so clear that this is the kind of structure in the Middle East. This is the kind of paradigm to understand the Middle East. Now, in 2011, something strange happened, something unexpected happened, which was the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring signaled a rejection of the status quo. It signaled a rejection of this triangle. See, the triangle only is able to close and go into another loop because it was very easy for Arab regimes to direct the anger of their own people at the West. It was very easy, and it just became kind of the modus operandi to direct the anger of the people at the West, and then talk to the West and say, no, don't push us because we're fighting terrorism. And that's basically what they did. In 2011, what was different is that for the first time, in a long, long while, we Arabs directed our anger at our own governments. And we did not do it the Al-Qaeda way, we did not do it the Bin Laden way, we did it through street protests, we did it non-violently. And this is what signaled really a rejection of the triangle. The problem here is that, within 2 years, and a lot has been spoken. I don't know why foreign journalists love to speak about the failure of the Arab Spring using very flowery language. They come up with new adjectives to just say, how much of a dismal failure it was. And, maybe, in Europe, you kind of forget what your transition of democracy looked like, really. And, we can talk about this a little bit, after my presentation. But in 2013, two things happened, especially August 2013 was just the most terrible month over there. In 2013, it became clear that the idea of violence is getting reimplanted. It was very clear. Of course, the roots maybe were already, the seeds were already sown in 2011, 2012. But in 2013, you had two major events, the Rabaa massacre in Egypt and the Ghouta chemical weapons attack in Syria, in the space of, I think it was in the space of a week or 10 days even. And this changed everything. 2013 was that point in which it became clear that we were running into another cycle. The triangle is not broken, and it's actually going into another cycle. And I remember at that point, I actually presented a very depressing kind of analysis of Egypt. And I called it my worst case scenario, and it's basically based upon something I call the Moran's theory. And but this is kind of a rundown of my prediction. And I said, this is going to be very pessimistic and very depressing and probably more accurate than we wish. And this is, you can see the date, it's 16 August 2013. And I said, the MB, the Muslim Brotherhood is going to be banned, membership is going to be outlawed, the leaders are going to be placed on the wanted list and charged with terrorism, the Muslim Brotherhood will be driven underground where they'll have less control over their cadres, some Muslim Brotherhood figures will come out and renounce violence and call for reason, but none of the cadres will pay heed to them. Several groups will splinter off and either join the jihadists or they're going to be a shift in ideology. These groups will hide not only in remote areas but also in villages and large cities. From there, they're going to wage an insurgency against the government. The army will respond with a heavy hand, increasing sympathy and recruitment opportunities for the extremists. When the extremists start to lose, they're going to move towards remote areas and start to plan attacks on other countries. In the meanwhile, emergency law will be extended. The roadmap will be put on hold for while we're fighting terrorism. Extremism rises. Police state will return in full swing in order to fight terrorism. Emergency law will be used not only against Islamists, but against anyone who challenges the police state. The Christian minority will bear the brunt of extremist attacks, leading to another wave of emigration. The administration will try to explain itself to the world, but will fail, and it will be shunned, and it will become an international pariah. As a result, it will turn towards richer regional neighbors, like the GCC states, and to Russia for arms. And as a result, the extremists will expand their list of targets, making life difficult for Egyptian immigrants overseas. Compounded economic trouble, stuck political process, police state and extremism will weaken society. And the virtuous spiral that started in 2011 will be reversed, and we'll get a downward spiral of increasing tyranny and extremism. And I'm depressed. This was August 2013. And, I close by saying, I hope we don't have as many morons, but unfortunately, we did. So, as depressing as this looks, things actually did not go as badly as I thought, I have to say. Something changed in the Arab psyche. Something changed in 2011 in the consciousness of a generation. And this is why I started to see that the triangle after 2013 was not as stable as it used to be. We did not get a return to the status quo. And I think, I'll try to summarize this. This is a long discussion, but I'll try to summarize it in 3 key indicators that I think need to be understood if you want to understand why the Arab world today is different from the Arab world 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And this is why this kind of triangle is not stable anymore, and it's dangerously unstable. It boils down to really 3 things. The first point is that the regimes don't really appear to be as stable as they were pre-2011. I mean, I think it's becoming more acknowledged right now that many of the regimes, this is a story about Saudi Arabia, for example. The IMF issued a warning that it's in danger of running out of money within 5 years. And this is forcing Saudi Arabia, which is classically one of the most stable Arab regimes, and this is one of the regimes that many Western countries, particularly the United States and the UK, have relied upon for regional stability, ironically enough. But they are at this point when they need to make the jump to a post-oil economy, and this is going to be interesting because we're going to see them try to, they cannot rely upon the religious establishment for legitimacy anymore, so they have to open up. And they cannot open up halfway. And I'm going to use a lot of examples from Saudi Arabia in particular because it's going to be a very interesting decade for Saudi Arabia. But the idea here, and I'm taking Saudi Arabia as a model here, but the point is that the Arab status quo does not go back to normal and is still very unstable. I did this poll on Twitter, this was a couple days ago, and I asked, I'm asking my own audience online, and my audience tend to be more involved in Middle East politics. Now, this is by no means a scientific poll, but it's just indicative in some way. Are the Arab world's key regimes stable over the next 10 to 15 years? And 77% after 1,200 votes said no. And I think some of the key instabilities are really becoming very manifest, especially in Egypt. I mean, if you think that we have a refugee crisis, imagine what happens if Egypt breaks. Just imagine that. The second thing that actually gives me a bit of hope is that Arabs, this time around, Arab young people are not adopting terrorism as much as you think they are. This is a graph that I created using openly available source data. And this was actually quite shocking to my audience in Norway. And you can see this is actually how many foreign fighters. It's actually wrongly titled. I titled ISIS fighters per 100,000 population. It's actually jihadists, foreign jihadists, per 100,000 Muslim citizens. And you can see that the Arab world has very low radicalization figures compared to the West. The Western countries actually have higher radicalization rates among Muslim communities, and actually even non-Muslims, than the Arab world. The other thing is that ISIS itself, the ISIS project, does not seem to be sustainable. This is another poll that I ran, a little bit less number of respondents here, 700 people. 80% said that ISIS is not sustainable over the next 1 to 5 years. So we have this situation. I mean, if we want to go and look back at the triangle again, we have this situation where the triangle is no longer stable. The terrorists are not winning. And even if they win, they don't even have a plan. They don't have anything sustainable. The tyrants are not stable anymore. And foreign intervention is kind of half and half. It's not effective. Nobody is thinking about anything at the scale of what happened in 2003, for example, with the Iraq War. And probably the Iraq War is what broke that, the failure, the dismal failure of the Iraq War is partly what led to that. But the one thing that gives me most hope, more than the unsustainability of Arab dictatorships or Arab regimes, and more than the unsustainability or the lack of vision among the terrorists in general, is that Arab societies themselves are different. Arab societies have evolved a lot. And this evolution happened, a lot of this evolution happened even before the Arab Spring, but an important amount of evolution happened after it as well. And I'm just going to try to walk you through a little bit of that. And this is a big topic, but on the top, you have two maps over here. On the top, you have literacy rate among Arab seniors. This is the literacy rate among Arabs who are 65 years and above. And you can see that it's actually below 30%. So if you're talking about people who are more than 65 years old, if they're still alive, they're mostly illiterate. But if you talk about people who are millennials, people who are under 25, then the literacy rate is actually 93%. In some Arab countries, like you can notice over here, you have Libya, it's 99%. In Saudi Arabia, it's 98%. Iraq is a little back because of a decade or 2 decades of war. But again, even Syria is 95%. Interesting thing to note over here, the median age of the Arab ruler is 69 years. The median age of an Arab ruler is 69 years, and the median age of an Arab citizen is 24 years. So you can notice the gap, and this is basically a change that's still going on. Now, someone might point to this as actually a very smart way to comment on this. North Korea also has a 100% literacy rate, right? So what's the point of having very high literacy if you don't have a choice about what to read? And this is what's really, really interesting. The fact that not only are Arab young people highly literate, it's also that they're more connected than ever in their history. When it comes to internet penetration, when it comes to, actually, most people right now in the Arab world access the internet on their mobiles than in their homes or on their laptops. But when it comes to that, you actually have very high figures and very interesting statistics. So you can see, for example, that the Arab world's internet users is going to reach 226 million by 2018. It's actually, in 2014, we actually bypassed global average. So we're actually more connected than average as a region. And you can see that, we're talking that mobile is actually the #1 medium, and you can see that the total penetration is actually 110%. There are more mobile subscriptions than there are people in the Arab world. In certain Arab countries, like, if we go from here to, if we take a look at this, for example, and you'll notice, for example, that among the top 3 connected countries when it comes to smartphones, 2 of them are Arab countries, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And I want to try to home in on Saudi Arabia in particular because it seems to be an indicative. I think a lot of change is going to come from that country in particular. So this is a study that was featured. This is from 2013 about YouTube in Saudi Arabia. And I'm just going to scroll down a little bit to just show you something here. Which is that Saudi Arabia right now is the biggest user of YouTube per capita in the world. The highest per capita consumption of YouTube in the world is in Saudi Arabia. And the biggest, by the way, I had some messages from some friends of mine about the study, and they said the #1 category is 20-something-year-old women. These are the people who consume the most YouTube. Going to Twitter, Twitter use, and at some point in 2012, it was up 3,000% in one single month. It quickly became one of the major markets, not only in the world, but in the region. This is a report about Twitter, and you can see here the number of Twitter users, etc. So this is the Twitter users per country, and the United States leads by far. However, if we adjust for population and we look for per capita, look at this. Saudi Arabia has the highest Twitter penetration rate in the world. 33%, 1/3 of all Saudis are active Twitter users. So classically in the Arab world, when something like this happens, the #1 medium is driven by government, normally. I mean, classically, the #1 newspaper is government-owned, the #1 TV station is government-owned, the #1 radio station is government-owned. And if it's not government-owned, then it's basically some religious scholar or religious personality or something. So let's see, is this still the case? These are the top subscribed channels in Saudi Arabia, and they're all youth-led talk shows or political shows or comedy or basically sarcastic shows. And if you want to see government channels, they're not even on the list. And if you want to go and find a religious scholar, the religious scholar is it's not even on, yeah, there. So it's number 29. So let's go back to the triangle for a little bit. And let's talk a little bit, let's try to take this in. What happened over here is that the triangle is no longer stable. And not only is it not stable, but there is pressure from inside. You see, triangles are actually, geometrically speaking, triangles are actually they're very stable figures. The more you push from inside, you're actually enforcing it. But they're very, very fragile from the inside. I mean, if you want to break a triangle, you break it from the inside. The problem is, with the kind of assault that's coming from Arab regimes at civil society and at free speech and every kind of reform, every kind of native reform, unfortunately, what we're looking at is a catastrophic breakage rather than something, slow and deliberate and well planned. One consequence of this, of what we're seeing here, one consequence of having no space in the streets, no space in the mainstream media, but a lot of space in alternative media for Arab young people, is that the public sphere, the Arab public sphere, shifted from being something something offline, from being something which is done in city halls, in the streets, to being something that's primarily done online. And I'm going to show you some examples, and these examples basically are quite hilarious when you want to compare the kind of respect that traditional media give to Arab governments versus what Arab young people give to Arab governments, which was actually one of the drivers of the Arab Spring. The thing is, the relationship between, or the attitude of a new Arab generation towards their governments has shifted, it's changed. So here's an example of a speech by Sisi. Can we switch to, yeah. And this is a speech where he was actually talking about the media and he was criticizing the media. And this was the punchline.
ايه ده؟ ما يصحش كده. يقول لك الرئيس سايب اسكندريه وقاعد ايه الشغل ده؟ والله الأمر ده لا يليق. والله هذا الأمر لا يليق يا جماعة.
So you have a room of generals clapping to the general. Let's see what Egyptian social media did with this.
ما يصحش كده. ما يصحش كده. ما يصحش كده. والله هذا الامر لا يليق يا جماعه. ما يصحش نعمل كده ببعض. انتوا بتعذبوني وانا جيت وقفت هنا ولا ايه؟ انتوا بتعذبوني وانا جيت وقفت هنا؟ ايه ده؟ ايه ده؟ ما يصحش كده.
So let's look how much attention this video got. It got 1.3 million views, almost 60,000 shares, 31,000 likes, and 8,500 comments. And this is only on one thread because some people copied it and then went on YouTube, and you got another thing going on YouTube. And this is one example. I mean, I don't know if these guys are still. I mean, I don't know if they got in trouble for it or not. But here's another example, which is a little bit more recent. This is when Sisi was commenting about he was commenting about the economic crisis in Egypt, and he said something like, "If it's so bad that if I could sell myself for Egypt, I would sell myself." And this is what he
أنا
said.
كان عليا والله هقول تعبير صعب جدا جدا. والله العظيم أنا لو ينفع أتباع لأتباع.
And again, you see a whole room of people clapping for him, and let's see what Egyptians online did. He said, "I'm going to sell myself," so they put him up on eBay. And the Arabic says, "For sale, a used general and a doctor with a military background, slightly used." And it fetched $100,000 on eBay before eBay thought, this is ridiculous and took it down. But they didn't take it down quickly enough, so the Independent picked up on it, and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is put on sale on eBay after claiming he would sell himself to help the economy. Now this is all fun and this is all funny, but I want to take you a little bit to what's happening on Saudi Twitter. This is an example. And this young man is a very talented cartoonist. And this is an example of, he actually got in trouble for this, and he actually was banned from one of the news. He lost one of his venues because of this. But this is what he did. He basically created this cartoon. And it's kind of, you can see it's basically the same thing. The top one says, we have, and you can see that someone is declaring official news, and he has a lot of people around him ready to clap and cheer for whatever he says. The top one says, we have a budget surplus. And these guys are going to basically clap and sing and dance and say, well done, government. The second one says, we have a budget deficit. And they're basically going to do the same thing. In Saudi Arabia, of course, there's a lot of really, really funny stuff. But I want to take you through the really serious stuff here. This is an example that happened a few days ago. This is Issam al-Zamil. Issam al-Zamil is an entrepreneur, Saudi entrepreneur. And recently, if you remember, if you've been following the news, recently Saudi Arabia declared that it's going to build a $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund. And mainly, it's going to be based around oil, and mainly based around Aramco, which is one of the biggest oil companies in the world. And Issam noted in a series of tweets, and his tweets basically are, these are his tweets. He later took them down because they got too much attention, but they reappeared as a screen grab. Essentially what he said, listen, I'm a businessman. I know that this company is not worth $2 trillion. And then he put two and two together and he said, listen, you guys are not only selling this company, you're selling all of its assets, which means that you're selling the petroleum as well. So you're selling our oil from under our own feet. And this oil does not belong to you, it belongs to the people. This is what you've been telling the people for the past 30 years, that we're only the custodians of the oil. The oil is not ours, it's yours. So he goes on and he basically explains it in 9 points. And he says that you cannot take a step like this without a referendum. You need to have a referendum before doing something like this. And he goes on to say, I will not accept a referendum unless there is free speech, because you cannot, if you control all the media, you control all the mainstream media, then you also control public opinion. And in which case you can just engineer it to make sure that you get a 97% or a 98%. So he said that it's not possible to take a decision like this without some kind of reform, some kind of democratic reform. And Saudi Twitter went crazy with this. And you can see that they actually created a hashtag. This translates to the oil or the petroleum is owned by the people. So we talk a lot about how we don't see any protests in Saudi Arabia, but when Saudi people want to protest, they go on Twitter. This is what happens. In fact, yesterday, a few days ago, I came across this tweet, and I'm going to just translate it very quickly. What happened here is that there was a Sharia court that gave a ruling. I don't want to go into it. Gave a ruling when it comes to a marriage. It was a marriage case. It gave a ruling, and the ruling was deemed by society to be very unjust. And the Saudi Twitter basically just went crazy with it. That it's very unfair. You should do something. And guess what happened? The decision was reversed. So Twitter created enough pressure for the government to intervene and upturn a Sharia court's decision. And this guy, what he's saying, Abdullah bin Abbad, he's saying, Twitter is the Arab parliament. Twitter is the parliament of the Arabs. So I just want to refer back to the triangle again so that we don't go too much off topic. So what we're having here is that there's a lot of pressure from within the triangle. There's a lot of pressure from within. And when you see that these regimes are actually being very brutal, when you're handling, let's say that you're handling, you're trying to hold back a certain force. If the force is weak, you don't have to be very brutal. You don't have to be you don't have to be, what do you say? You don't have to go to extremes to face it because, it's a weak force. However, if the force you're up against is very strong, that's when you have to be really brutal. And in many ways, Arab regimes are having to be this brutal because they're being challenged, not only because they're brittle and they're fragile, but also because they're being challenged like never before. Now, what happens when you actually take Arabs? Of course, Arabs cannot convene in one place without some kind of security apparatus breathing down their necks. So what happens when you actually put Arabs together in one room and you actually ask them to just speak? And this is what we did on this Munadara is a really wonderful NGO. They do debates across the Arab world. They were founded in 2011. I really encourage you to find their page and follow it, even though a lot of the stuff is in Arabic. I sit on the board of this organization, proudly enough. And what they did is that they actually do debate cycles. And they do televised debates, which is strange that they can still do this, but they do this mainly because there's good money in it. So, sometimes the governments will look the other way if there's a lot of money in it. But also because the venue, they choose venues either in Tunisia, this time they did it in Istanbul. And what happens, they had this event last year, and what happened is that they said, we're going to be a little provocative, and we're going to say that the motion this year is, take 99 seconds to Arab normal young people, and take 99 seconds and give a message, a video message for people for your rulers, for people who are in power. And the meaning of the hashtag was, this I say to those in power. And you could just, the event is in Arabic. I hope it gets translated, but you can just see what happens when you put young Arabs in a room and you tell them, speak to your rulers. It was a protest. It was everything that we saw in 2011. Now, I think, how are we doing on time? Okay. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. And of course, my message in the end, if I want to give a message, just to close this, my message is that if we want to see any kind of stability in that region, and we know that that region is important, especially for Europe, it's very close to Europe, The solution is not to advocate some kind of return to pre-2011 because that will not happen. The Arab psyche, it's not, we're talking about the shrinking space right now, right? We're talking about shrinking space. It's not just about shrinking space, it's that the Arab psyche has expanded. So it's not just a matter that, your clothes your clothes don't fit you anymore. It's not that the clothes became shrunk, it's that you became bigger, right? In a way, that's what happens. If I have to give a message, it's that if you want to see a stable Middle East, then you need to disbelieve in Arab regimes, but you have to believe in Arab societies. These are some of the most dynamic and most promising societies on earth. Thank you.
Iyad, thank you very much for that. And great final line as well. We're going to be opening to questions. We have about 10-15 minutes for questions, so if I could please ask you to keep the questions quite short, because obviously there's a lot of people that will want to hear Iyad's thoughts.
I also noticed that there might be an acoustics issue in the room, so we'll have to find a way around it. But if you need to ask the question in Italian also, I think we can get it translated.
Absolutely, right. It's fine. I'd like to start with a question, just while people are gathering their thoughts. One thing that you don't really focus on, which perhaps might surprise this audience, is religion, which actually is quite telling of the different narratives between the Middle East and the West. So whether we call it, Islamist extremism, global jihadism, radicalization, the many names that we've seen in Europe, but also in Pakistan, the recent attack on Easter Sunday. What do you think the role of religion or distortion of religion plays in everything that we've seen happen in the Middle East and beyond?
Well, I'm gonna split this into two different issues. The first issue is religion as cultural identity. If you want to talk to Arabs about anything, you need to put it in terms of their own experience, and their own cultural experience, and their own historical experience, and in their own spiritual experience. And this is why when we speak about liberty in the Arab world, we need to indigenize it. We need to speak about liberty and democracy and liberal values, which I don't believe there are basically Western values. I believe these are universal human values. We need to speak about it in terms of Islam, not aside of Islam. This is very important, and this is often overlooked, and this is actually at the center of the failure of many of the best reformists we had. Some of the most inspiring reformists in the history of the past 100 years got this successful because they were very skilled at relating liberalism in general, but also the parts that actually are most relevant to the Arab world into our own history, our own culture, our own religion. So that's one point. The second point about the negative side, which we're talking about extremism, we're talking about jihadism, etc. One thing is that because keep in mind that Muslims are the #1 victims of terrorism. I mean, these guys kill more Muslims than any other group. I mean, they kill more Muslims than Christians, they present themselves as the defenders or the protectors, but they actually, in the end, they're actually extortionists. The one thing I want to point out is, whenever you see, maybe I'll take Iraq as an example, and Iraq is a country that was racked by horrible atrocities over the past decade, or more than over a decade. The really amazing thing that I find about Iraq, and I don't blame any Iraqi for being angry at what happened to their country, but what you really need to notice here is that people get up the next day, they send their children to school, and they go to work. I think what's really underappreciated here is how resilient these societies are. Yes, they're brutalized. And yes, there's a lot of atrocities. Yes, it can't be. It's basically a very unsustainable, very brutal situation. But these are very resilient societies, and people the next day, you have an explosion in Belgium, and the country shuts down. I was in Belgium, the week after. The country shuts down. When you have one in Iraq, and I hope, of course, the context is completely different. I hope that Europe never gets to that position. But life is going on, and children are still going to school, people are still going to work, and I think this is how you defeat extremism. This is how you defeat terrorism, by basically getting up and going on with your life as normal.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's take some questions. Start with the lady at the front.
Thank you. Mr. Baghdadi, I'm a bit concerned by your triangle of tyrant, terrorist, and foreign intervention. And I want to ask you, what do you consider as a terrorist? How you define who is a terrorist and who is a freedom fighter? Are all those youth, ordinary people who took to the street peacefully, demanding freedom, dignity, rule of law, are terrorists? If so, I am also a terrorist. And until when will we leave to Assad, Sisi, and other rulers to tell us who is a terrorist, who is not? Just to say that I feel that in the Middle East, we are trapped by this labelization of terrorism. And I wanted to ask you, how can we escape this labelization and put human rights back on the agenda, because there can't be stability without human rights. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think I met you at a previous panel. I think you're Tunisian, right? Yeah. So that kind of puts a different context to your question. Now, the question of who's a terrorist or not, there are certain sides in the world who are more than happy to blur the distinction because they want to call anyone who opposes the government a terrorist. In fact, I mean, if you actually read, this was from, I think, 2012, Saudi Arabia wanted to update its terrorism law, and when a couple women activists challenged the ban on women driving, and basically they drove publicly inside Saudi Arabia, they were charged with terrorism. The same kind of discussion goes on also in Syria, because there's a whole thing of who is a moderate, how do you define a moderate rebel, etc. And I think it's just 2 points and very easy. It's not that complex a question. Number one, what is your goal? Is your goal democracy, or is your goal to establish another tyranny? And number two, are you willing to subject yourself to a higher law? Are you willing to subject yourself to a human rights, like a human rights tribunal or a human rights court? These are it's that simple. If you're doing this within the confines of acceptable human rights, and if you're doing this for the protection of human rights and because you want a democracy, then of course you're not a terrorist. Unfortunately, the language that we use in radicalization debates is absolutely terrible. I mean, when we talk about radicalization, a radical is not exactly a bad thing, but radicalization is bad. Terrorism is not really well defined. Sometimes we say extremism, sometimes we say fundamentalism. Unfortunately, because the language itself is ambiguous, a lot of people use it to weasel out of the issues. But thanks for the question.
Thank you. Question at the front.
Thank you. Thanks very much for a really inspiring talk. One of the things that struck me is, you mentioned the activism, the enthusiasm with which a lot of Arabs are speaking out. I was in prison in Egypt alongside Alaa Abdel Fattah, who was one of the principal bloggers in the Arab Spring in Egypt, Ahmed Mehr, Ahmed Domer, and so on. You've been yourself expelled from the region. To what extent, we're seeing a lot of these regimes imprisoning or expelling, deporting some of the key opinion formers from online. To what extent does that have an impact on the discussions within the Middle East? To what extent does that tend to crush people's willingness to speak out? Is it having any effect at all?
Well, it's definitely had an effect, and the people who you're talking about are basically my friends and my comrades. And of course, it's very jarring when you look back at the last 5 years and you just think how many of my friends died, how many were tortured, how many are still in jail, how many were exiled. In a way, I was exiled, and that was probably the less traumatic of the options. But the thing is, I believe that we had two waves, or two kind of phases in activism. We had the early activists, I call them phase one activists. These were street activists, like Alaa Abdel Fattah. And these guys had a history of activism. They're extremely brave people. It takes that kind of bravery to be able to stand up to a police state. They have absolutely no respect for the status quo. They have absolutely no respect for the authorities. They know that the authorities hate them as well. The thing is, you cannot imprison them forever. You cannot exactly get rid of them forever. Eventually, Ala Abdel Fattah will be out of jail, and eventually he'll be back to his work. But what's really interesting here is that we need to speak more about the Phase 2 activists. And the Phase 2 activists, these are the guys who are the intellectuals. And these are the guys who have the key to the solution. Because the main problem here is that we have a lack of ideas that goes back decades. A lack of new ideas, a political vacuum in intellectual vacuum in political thought. And this is, I was actually reading on the way here on the plane to Italy, I was reading Malik bin Nabi, who's an Algerian philosopher who lived, he did most of his work before the 1970s. And I'm just amazed at that what he's talking about then. In some ways, of course, he's talking about different societies. We're much more literate. We're much more, the societies have evolved a lot. But we still have the same intellectual vacuum. And the Phase 2 activists really need to do their job. And this is where I think this is where it's really important to focus. Has it affected activism? Of course it did. And this actually worries me a lot because especially Egypt. Egypt is going up against every NGO, every civil society group, every reformist, everyone who can help in case there's a breakage. In a way, they're saying that, we're going to make sure that we're the only option. But what happens when the only option doesn't work?
Okay, I'm being told we have very little time. So there's a question at the back. Anybody else? Okay, just a question at the back, please, and that's going to have to be it.
Hey, I really enjoyed your talk. I just, as an American, as somebody who hears that foreign intervention is bad and somebody who sees it as part of the problem, I'm curious, what is the role of these Western civilizations in terms of helping instead of making the problem worse? Is there anything we can do, just as somebody who's a student and trying to make a difference?
I need you to ask that again slowly because there's the acoustic over here.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course. I'm sorry. I'm a little nervous, so I'm rambling a little bit. What is the role of foreign intervention? Is there any way for foreign society to be, or for Western society to be a positive force for change to help the Arab society grow in a way that's positive? Yeah. Well, if you notice, foreign intervention is one of the angles, basically, of the triangle. Right. And in a recent update, we actually changed it from foreign intervention to just the West. The thing is, given the history of the region and the history of the West within the region, it's very difficult. Even if you do nothing, you're doing something. I mean, even doing nothing is keeping things as they are, given your the previous intervention. The problem here that I see a lot is that there is this paradigm that says that we have to find the right guys to work with. So we have to know who to work with. So we can either work with these guys or these guys. Even when we talk about Islamic reform, so who do we talk to? Do we talk to people like Tariq Ramadan, or do we talk to people who are Sufis, or do we talk to the Muslim Brotherhood? Who do we talk to? And I think that itself is a failed paradigm. That's a wrong paradigm. For several reasons, don't want to get into it. We don't have a lot of time. But I think the real one thing that the West should do is to be very principled about defense of free speech and defense of civil society. If we have just those two things, if we have an active civil society and if we have actual free speech, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be working. Then these societies can take care of themselves. The reform cycle can turn internally. We don't have to. We won't have to go to extremes in that point. I mean, the one thing which is quite annoying in many of these debates is that we're talking about intervention, which is the edge. What you do is kind of like we're talking about someone who has some kind of a disease, and we're talking about surgery. Before we talk about eat well, sleep well, and maybe if things get bad, then okay, here's some medicine, etc. We're talking about intervention. If you have to do intervention, that means that there's already a history of failure, and this is, I think, important to note.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for all the questions. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we could listen to you for hours, so thank you. And to the audience, remember that Iyad will be publishing a book called The Vicious Triangle in Italian by La Terza in a couple of months. So I'm sure this discussion will go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.